Then we look at the fact that this is Denver watershed, and whatever they put in the water up top is going to affect possibly me as well. It'll affect you, anyone in the Denver watershed. That's 1.5 million customers. Now, they'll say it dilutes. They'll say that there's a half-life of just a few days. But we did find an EPA document from 2006 where they wanted to reapply for this particular use that said in colder waters, it could hang around at toxic levels for up to 160 days. So you're talking about high-altitude alpine lakes and creeks in colder areas. Obviously, at night, it still gets down into the 30s. So are we looking at the half-life correctly?
Welcome, Wild Ones. Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. This week's guest is Mike Rawluk. Mike is a concerned citizen living in Jefferson County, Colorado, who tries to look at issues one at a time without regard to which political forces may support or denounce the issue. Welcome back to the Green Root Podcast, Mike.
Hi, how's it going, Josh? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to have you on because you have been digging deep into an issue and you've been writing pieces on it that we have been running in Colorado Green Voice, which is a new Colorado environmental media outlet that I'm a part of with some other folks. And you brought an issue to my attention that I wasn't really aware of, but I think is super important and has not just Colorado relevance, but nationwide. So do you want to give us an overview of what we're talking about here?
Sure. When there is deemed to be non-native fish or other aquatic species in a waterway, there are multiple different ways to, dare I say, handle the problem, right? But, is it a problem in the first place? And we can get into that. Obviously, I think it's a matter of scale. Electric eels, so to speak. I know they're saltwater, but I'm just using something over the top. Could be a problem, in a small waterway up in the mountains. I understand that pythons down in the Everglades have become a big deal. But here we're talking about one species of Colorado trout versus another species of Colorado trout that are only separated by about 60 miles. And other lesser types of situations like that. And this is a concern. I found out that they were going to be using rotenone. Rotenone is a natural pesticide. It is a toxin that comes from pea plants and pea plant derivatives in the equatorial zones of the world. It's been used for hundreds of years. That doesn't mean it's right. And so one of the things that I think we keep finding is when we talk about this, people say, well, it's been used traditionally. It's been used in fisheries since the 30s or the 50s or what have you. So therefore, it must be good. And I just don't know if that logic flies. There is a type of trout called the blue lineage cutthroat trout that happens to be in Steelman, Bobtail, and McQueary Creeks up by Jones Pass. And part of this is Vaquez Peak Wilderness. How it came to my attention is we were going to the Denver Water Board meeting because of some growth that's happening in our area. And we're wondering, how is the growth sustainable during a time of drought, especially? Where are the wires getting crossed when you get will-serve letters supposedly from a water authority, yet we have drought restrictions and things like this? And we're generally concerned. We're seeing Antero Reservoir getting completely drained out, to save other reservoirs and all those fish die. But yet growth can still happen. So that's kind of why we were looking at the Denver Water Agenda. But on page whatever, it started talking about the removal of certain non-native species of cutthroat trout to restore the native species of cutthroat trout. Sounds great on its surface. But when you get into it, you say, first of all, where are these trout from? Are they from a different continent? Are they causing a huge problem? Well, no, they're from the Yampa Valley as compared to, the Vaquez Peak Wilderness area. So you're like, okay, well, it's not that far away. Do they compete? Well, they actually can become hybrids. And then the last thing is, well, if they can become hybrids, how genetically distinct can they be? We had found an article that talked about a study in circa around 2010, 2012, where they actually had to go find museum specimens of certain fish and actually look at different genetic strains to figure out how different these fish actually are or not, because you couldn't really tell by a visual. So sure, they're becoming hybrids because maybe they can't tell they're different either. Who knows? I'm not in the fish brain, but the idea here is they're genetically close enough. Unlike where people talk about a coyote and a dog, if they can hybridize or not, like they're pretty genetically distinct. These things are not, it seems, but yet we were told that they are just as distinct as a polar bear and a grizzly bear. Okay, does that mean you have to kill the polar bears to make room for the grizzly bears, or are conditions changing, or is it the fish's fault themselves that they got into this area that they shouldn't have been? They were put there. There's a lot of evidence that says that they were put there for fishing purposes. They didn't just take a ride on a bird. And if they did take a ride on the bird, that would be a natural process. And if the eggs got there, then so be it. Nature can nature. So then we look at the fact that this is Denver watershed, and whatever they put in the water up top is going to affect possibly me as well. It'll affect you, anyone in the Denver watershed. That's 1.5 million customers. Now, they'll say it dilutes. They'll say that there's a half-life of just a few days. But we did find an EPA document from 2006 where they wanted to reapply for this particular use that said in colder waters, it could hang around at toxic levels for up to 160 days. So you're talking about high-altitude alpine lakes and creeks in colder areas. Obviously, at night, still gets down into the 30s. So are we looking at the half-life correctly? And then the last thing they'll say is, well, all you have to do is use potassium permanganate, and it will take out the nasty side effects of the rotenone. And then I look at potassium permanganate. It itself has some nervous system effects, apparently. So, Josh, in that sense, it's almost like, well, I'll take this heart medication, but it might give me an upset stomach. So I'll take the upset stomach medication, but it might affect my liver. So now I have to, down the road we go. So when we're adding stuff to our water supply, is it human health that we should be concerned about? I believe so. And then also, is it the species health in general? So just like glyphosate, it doesn't pick and choose what kind of plants it kills overall. I understand certain grasses will tolerate glyphosate. But if you're spraying an herbicide, it kills basically everything in its path. Similarly, rotenone will take out all the aquatic species in its path. It'll take out the zooplankton. It'll take out invertebrate species. So they have to actually time it out depending on time of year, so they don't kill the tadpoles, but hopefully the adult frogs have migrated or dug in or whatever they do to survive for the winter. And it's just like, gosh, you're planning on killing everything in this creek and hoping the seasonality of your application time will help save certain species for next year. Sounds like using quite a broad analogy of like a shotgun blast to pinpoint a solution. Whereas in Bobtail and Marshall Creek, they use the electrofishing, they use nets, they use physical barriers, things like that won't affect the other species quite as much. So multifold problem there, Josh. First of all, is it a problem? And that's debatable, right? And I know that you've talked about with Eco Integrity Alliance, you start looking at that part of it. Is it a problem, or is this a general morphology of nature, right? Is this where we're trending? Do we want to go back to the original? And then from there, we get into the health effects on the fish, the amphibians, and they're supposed to bury the fish. So there's hopefully no effects on the mammals. They use studies from the 80s that the EPA spent money on to say that they won't outright kill larger mammals or mid-size. I think they went mid-size on that one. But then we don't know the long-term bioaccumulation effects. So the last concern would be Parkinson's disease. They're showing that this can bioaccumulate and cause Parkinson's. They say the bioaccumulation could last decades. This is something I was reading about. And so the Parkinson's can show up decades after exposure. The tests themselves did use mice or rats, which I'm not in favor of animal testing, but they did inject them with rotenone as opposed to having them ingest them. So there's a difference there. But in the idea of the most conservative, if you don't have an ingestion study on long-term effects, but you're only looking at ingestion studies on do you die within the next week or not, there is a fallacy to the science. They can't watch a bear and study it for 10 to 15 years to see, because all mammals apparently have Parkinson's-like diseases in their particular species. They can all have demyelation, neurodegenerative type of things. So in that sense, how do you do a long-term study on mammals that are truly wild? You're basically kind of like in the pool, billiards terminology, poke and hope, right? You say, I hope this works. We really are not going to watch this bear for 20 years to see if it develops any kind of neurodegenerative situation. It's just not worth the money. So they're looking at the acute situation of this does this bear die or not? I think we're missing the bioaccumulation side of this whole thing, and just the general shotgun type of idea that this just goes everywhere, and whatever dies, and we start fresh. So, and then the last thing I would say, Josh, is the soul aspect. If you believe a fish has a soul, like a human could have a soul as part of creation, why are you killing these fish just for being guilty of being in the wrong spot? Can we move them? They're only 50 miles away. Now, again, I understand the whole hyperbolic electric eel situation. If they're going through, you got the murder hornets up in the Washington state killing off bee colonies, that could be a really big problem. And that, I think that would change the conversation. But what are these fish the problem?
Yeah. Well, that's a great overview of the topic. And yeah, really glad you're calling this to people's attention. And it seems like you have a really good head for the details of all this and really care about this issue. So yeah, a couple thoughts I had is there is this long standing debate in the environmental conservation community, whatever you want to call it, around the invasive species versus the extirpation of the invasive species, and whether or not sometimes the medicine, the cure is worse than the disease. So when something turns into pesticides, or I guess in this case they're calling it a piscicide, right? Piscicide, like fish.
Yes.
And piss. Well, I guess that's how it's framed. And that is a huge red flag in my mind. The fact that it's going to toxic material, and you can say, yes, things come from nature, but so does arsenic, right? That doesn't really mean anything. And it's not like they're just using the plant and dropping it in the water. They are, I don't think they're synthesizing, but they are, what's the word, concentrating it. So that's a valid concern, right?
Yeah, when we talk to the CPW biologists, it comes in a concentrated form, but then they have to dilute it to a
Well, sure.
specific
But I mean,
situ. No,
when you
no,
take it from the plant, though, it's
right,
not
right,
like they're not
right.
just crumbling up a plant and putting it in the water, and so there's almost a chemical process. There's something that's being done, and so maybe they re-dilute it. But all I'm saying is that when it's natural, it's not like it's the immediate use of just the plant itself. They doing a process to make it usable in terms of spreading it out there. So I think that's a concern. But the concern itself in terms of invasive species. So there are people who are concerned just about, like you were saying before, the idea of just killing off animals because they happen to be in a certain area. There's a T.C. Boyle novel. It's sort of like an eco thriller that came out decades ago that basically pits two types of environmentalists against each other. One that wants to kill off these invasive species in some coastal island because they're like, well, that's good for the ecosystem. We have to get rid of this non-native species. And others are saying, listen, they're there right now. They may be filling this ecological niche without harming the other species. What's the obsession with getting rid of it? So there's this concept called eco-integrity. So eco-integrity alliances is loosely based off of it, but the concept of, is the ecosystem itself in balance and maintaining itself? So does a slightly variant genetic of trout, is that really harmful to the ecosystem? Maybe it's really important to have the specific native fish, but I think the real elephant in the room here, or trout in the room, is the fact that it's native in this state. This is not like some South American or some like Russian fish that came in and it's 50 miles away, like you're saying. It's not that far removed from its normal range. So I think those all have to be taken into account.
I would completely agree. We went up there. We went to the wrong McQueary Creek the first time because it's very tough to find McQueary Creek. So we went to the one up in Grand County, and there was very little water. Couldn't find evidence of any fish. Talked to a BLM ranger. He has not seen fish in that creek for a long time. And that goes into the Windy Gap Reservoir. So we thought we found it, took a bunch of pictures, and went to the Denver Water hearing. I think it was June 23rd. And we talked to the wildlife biologist prior to the hearing. He wanted to explain some certain things of his position because he was going to present his PowerPoint. And we wanted to talk as well. Found out we went to the wrong McQueary Creek. Mm-hmm. There's one that starts in Vaquez Peak Wilderness. And that's important for the story because the lake and part of the creek is actually in the wilderness, and that's governed by the Wilderness Protection Act. The rest of the creek does go into regular national forest and again goes into our water supply. It connects in with Steelman and Bobtail creeks at a certain point. So we went there, and to get to McQueary Lake is a challenge. There is an access road that takes you about half of the way, and the other half of the way you have to go off trail. Respectfully, partially the reason why I want to go is to see if we could save this lake. We did leave no trace. We wanted to make sure that we're respectful of where we're going. And when we got there, the lake itself is generally about 2 to 4 feet deep in most spots that we could see. Maybe it gets a little deeper out, but it's basically a very shallow valley, and it just sits in the lowest spot of that particular part of the valley. No dam is there, no nothing. So it is a natural lake. It wasn't dammed up, to become a reservoir. We could see some fish in there. I couldn't tell you if they're green lineage or blue lineage. Apparently, very few people could by sight because they had to do genetic testing. So the question there is, if they're isolated, like you said, is it a problem? Now, the second thing, we saw evidence of a lot of bear. We understand that bear can eat fish. I did see some kind of canid. It was white. I know there's not a native white fox, though I think there could be a genetic variant here. I've seen one up on Squaw Pass Road once. It was larger than a fox, though, I believe. So it could be a coyote. We did talk to some folks in Denver Water. They said there were coyotes up at 11,000 and 12,000 feet. And they also did say they had wolves that had been through the area. And the one had made it back up to Walden. So probably not that. However, they also might look at that as a food source. And there's also birds in the area, birds of prey and such. So, you're killing off a potential food supply in a rich valley area for 1 to 2 years and then restocking it. So, like you said, the long-term effects. What are you doing to the animals who rely on those trout now? Are those trout causing a problem? They seem to be isolated. We did look into parts of the creek where we could access it. No evidence of fish. Now, it's a drought year. There could be years where everything's flowing a lot more, and maybe there are fish in the creek going, from pool to pool type of situation. But again, if they're that big of a problem, can we get them through physical means? We could see enough of the fish, and I was with a friend who's done a lot of different eco work throughout the world, and he's like, 2 guys in a net could solve this problem in a few days. If it's a problem.
That's a huge point. So I want to stress the idea that this is in a wilderness area.
Yes.
Because that makes a huge difference. Obviously, the idea that we're poisoning a watershed at all, I wouldn't be supporting that. Eco Integrity Alliance would not be supporting it. The fact that it's tying into drinking watersheds and Denver Water, which for the record, they're doing damming, they're doing logging, they're no friend of the environment. I think the fact that they are poisoning a potential drinking watershed, that's a huge issue. And does this turn into drinking water potentially, or how does that work?
It does.
Exactly? Okay.
It does. So from what I understand, this because we talked to the Denver Water guys, there is a little kind of Denver Water campus, as it were, about 6 or 7 buildings at the beginning of this access road. They used to live there. Now, because of budget cuts, they actually have to commute in with Denver Water vehicles, which doesn't make any sense. It sounds like it's cheaper to live there than drive 2 hours. But they said that they had just gotten a call to start releasing more water to Shoshone, which would be the dam and the hydroelectric dam by Glenwood Canyon, I believe. So it sounds like they have means to divert water this way or that. So there's a watershed, but they also, I think it connects to Moffett up there. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of different piping systems throughout the mountains that bring water across, to the Continental Divide to Denver area, and also could divert it out towards the western slope as well. Looking at the maps for Denver water, it's just amazing that the collection systems and the distribution systems. I think you'd actually have to have an engineer with a GIS map to really explain what's going on. However, I do know that some of this water does get into Denver area. So with that, first they had said it was pretty scary, the water levels that we have right now, just as an aside. They've never seen anything like it, number one. And number two, yes, this water is Denver watershed. I guess they have the water rights. Denver water was created by the Denver City Charter in 1918. But prior to that, Denver City had some water rights, and that's how they kind of put this whole thing together. Just for quick history, it's by city charter. So, with that in mind, when it comes to a wilderness area, this kind of hit me a while back when I thought about rotenone, because I remember that Wilderness Watch had a big win, and it's right here. It's a Wilderness Watch versus U.S. State Forest Service up in the District of Montana, Missoula Division. I think it was a 10th Circuit Court. I could be wrong. I don't read court cases for a living. I'm not an attorney, but it was the Buffalo Creek Project in Custer Gallatin National Forest and Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, and they were going to do 45.5 wilderness stream miles of rotenone application to get rid of rainbow trout and replace them with Yellowstone cutthroat trout. And Wilderness Watch here argues that the project unlawfully elevates managers' desired outcomes above the Wilderness Act's untrammeled mandate by authorizing a stunning amount of intensive motorized and mechanical intrusions and other prohibited activities into the wilderness, ... to poison miles of streams and wetlands in a remote watershed. And the court said Wilderness Watch is correct on that. There's a 20-page analysis, and maybe we can link this but the simple fact of the matter is the Wilderness Act, I think it's 1954, governs what can happen on this part of the land. That's why I brought it up, that the part of the creek and the lake itself is on wilderness land. So should this be left alone? Should we find other means? Like I said, it was very difficult to get there for two people. So how are they going to get the canisters up there? How are they going to get the tools to bury the dead fish? Can they bury dead fish on wilderness land and disturb the soil? Or do they have to cart all the dead fish from the lake down to a different area and dispose of them a different way? The fish that we saw were basically fingerlings, so I don't think that there would be too much weight. But it does raise a lot of concerns about what kind of activities would happen to properly mitigate rotenone-killed fish on wilderness land where you're not supposed to have anything motorized. So what do you do with that? And so we did reach out to Wilderness Watch, and they're going to look into it. They were pretty interested in this situation, but I don't know if that means that it's still going to be a Colorado-specific situation, or does Wilderness Watch just help? And I hate to look for that handout. I kind of just want more of the hand up and say, how do we do this for our state? Because we're not just seeing it in McQueary Creek. One of the members of Eco Integrity Alliance that you had spoken to had pointed out how it's happening in Rocky Mountain National Park. We looked into California. I think it's happening in the Russian River area. They're doing it in Utah. They're doing it pretty much everywhere. Now, it seems like a lot of rotenone application, for sure, hundreds of square miles in general. Obviously, it's not a lot of rotenone being used. It's like 200 parts per million or something like this. So when I looked into total U.S. rotenone sales, to be fair, it's about $500,000 a year or less. But this stuff is banned for my house use, your house use, anybody, any agricultural use. It's banned for everything except for our watershed.
Didn't know that.
2006, the EPA banned it for everything except for this one specific use. So if it has to be banned for everything else, it begs the question, is this an appropriate use? If the folks that apply this have to have PPE for their safety, obviously it's more concentrated than what, as it spreads out in the water and dilutes. But if you have to use PPE, well, then same question. And here's the other thing. If you're carting this up in handheld jugs or whatever, and it's getting sloshed around and falls into wilderness areas, what are you going to do then? Are you going to go dig out that soil and bury it appropriately? So you have contamination effects up that 2 miles of not even having a trail if you're bringing it to this lake. It just seems like a whole lot of mess. And then when we get into the taxpayer side, or the bill payer side, I should say at this point, the total project cost for Denver Water will be one half of 300,000 apparently for this. And rotenone is not going to be all of that, but it does add to that question of, should I, as a Denver Water tertiary recipient or secondary recipient, because I'm a North Table Mountain Water, they buy their water 100% from Denver Water, should I be paying for this? I don't think so. I think it's a total waste of money.
Yeah, all those are valid points in my opinion. And I just did a quick search for any media coverage on this. And besides what you had written for Colorado Green Voice, you'd written 2 articles. I found one article on this, and it's by an entity called Sky High News. They're serving Grand County. I'm not even familiar with them. And basically, it reads like an agency press release. So it just talks about how awesome and great it is. The NGOs that get money to promote it are also promoting it along with the government. Not a single critique in this whatsoever. So that's something to maybe look into, is making media a little more aware of this. But media in Colorado are notoriously awful. We have a letter right now, an open letter circulating to get signatures to basically hold Colorado media accountable for its poor or lack of environmental reporting. So we're in this basically drought. It's basically this like media desert here, and mostly it's things like this article. It's just, oh, our government agency said a thing, it must be true because we're Colorado. And yeah, that's really frustrating. But I would say a talking point that should be front and center, it's the first I heard of it, is that it's banned for individual household use by the EPA in 2006. That should be front and center, because that's quite shocking. And then it's like, oh, but it's fine to drink it. It's kind of like the idea of this place, Rocky Flats here, that was producing plutonium pits for nuclear weapons. There's plutonium contamination everywhere, and it's in this one reservoir. And then there's actually drinking water supply nearby. And they're like, oh, don't worry, it doesn't get into the drinking water. And it's like, maybe, but maybe the hell not. And I'm sorry, I don't want my water anywhere near plutonium. So that's the propaganda that's going on. But yeah, hopefully Wilderness Watch, or if not, then someone else can address this. I think it's worth looking more into it happening in Rocky Mountain National Park, making this more of an issue here in Colorado, and the fact that this is happening west-wide and I assume nationwide. This should be more on people's radar. I wasn't, maybe I had sort of heard of some of this at one point, but it really hadn't been on my radar till you brought it to my attention. So if I don't know about it, I think most people are not going to, even be aware of this. So yeah, huge.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, it just was by happenstance that we ran into it on an agenda. It was an agenda item for a meeting that we were going for a completely different topic, more
Right.
about land use stuff. So
Yeah, but this is a big deal. That this needs to be dealt with across the country, and I think it comes down to, so we have Denver Water, which is a corporation, but we have Colorado Parks and Wildlife, which is a government agency here under the Department of Natural Resources in Colorado. So DNR is actively logging our forests under phony fuel reduction. So is Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They are front and center in that. I will say that there are great people inside Colorado Parks and Wildlife, particularly
absolutely.
the biologists who I actually had on years ago to talk about some issues. But the agency itself, I would say, is highly mismanaged. And what this is coming down to, and I want to get your take on this though, this is more taxpayer funding for bloated government agencies to do busy work to justify their existence and to keep the funding flowing, because that's what fuel reduction is. They're like, okay, we're drying up funding. Oh, if we pretend we're logging for a wildfire, all of a sudden we get all this influx of money. I guess we're loggers now. So would you say that could be potentially part of, because like, why is this even a priority with this funding?
So this is part of a 2016 gross reservoir expansion project agreement. So what I'm afraid of is, and I might be incorrect, but this is just an opinion, that this becomes similar to the omnibus type situations we see in DC, where everybody's trying to squeeze in their pet project into an omnibus. And if the omnibus says something, and again, I'm being hyperbolic, like Save the Kids Act, and you literally put in something about, mining through a specific part of the national forest up in Alaska, how dare you vote against saving the kids? And you're like, yes, but I wasn't so happy about this mine that was going to go right through this precious national forest. But if I vote against it, then, this kids. So one thing is sometimes people don't recognize what's in the agreement. And the other thing is sometimes it's inconsequential to the greater strategy of that. I'll give you one. There was an omnibus bill many years ago where some Republican had slipped in something about the legality of hunting wild Mustangs into like a defense authorization or something like this. So on page 812 out of 2040, before AI, it's tough to scrub everything. And even if it does show up, what do you do about it? You need a defense authorization bill to go through because like we need defense. But these other things are in there, so it goes through, and you say, well, that's just the cost of government. And it's like, yeah, but now we look at this one specific situation, or pick one, right? And you're saying, okay, you force your pet project through based on something a lot of people believe in. A lot of people believe in the need to expand the gross reservoir. That's a bigger topic I don't want to get into today, but a lot of people say we need to expand gross reservoir. There could be pros and cons to that kind of situation. But why the heck did someone put in, well, okay, we're going to go kill those nasty fish up there in Jones Pass? The fish don't get in the pipe and go into gross reservoir. It's a piping system that gets things, like the Moffat Tunnel system and all this kind of stuff. So you could have screens and filters that keep this matter, eggs or something like this, out of the water you're transferring. They're probably treating it before it goes into the pipes. I don't know, but I'd assume there's some kind of treatment before it goes into GRE or gross reservoir because of the potential of other invasive species, bacteria, what have you. I think it would be kind of responsible to do that as far as like, okay, you got a bacteria that invaded here. We don't want the bacteria to go over there, so we might have to filter it. But yeah, it wasn't a standalone item. And I don't know if this could be a standalone item. Like you wouldn't go to Denver Water and say, we need to do this because it's good because the wrong type of fish is in there. They say, oh, it's tied into a 2016 agreement. So I guess our hands are tied as long as the science looks good enough. We did talk about the Parkinsons, and they all just shoot it away. And there was a unanimous vote to go ahead and put more stuff into our water supply. You think about the PFAS, you think about the glyphosate, you think about the atrazine, and you think about everything else, plutonium, like backscatter of arsenic and uranium in this state. And then it's like, okay, well, that wasn't enough. We need to get those evil fish, and we need to put one more thing into your water.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may be worth reaching out to some of the other organizations in the state. I wonder if the folks who were fighting the expansion of Gross Reservoir, which is just about 10 miles as the crow flies from my house, if they were able to get a court win where they won against Denver Water for the expansion, but they're still allowed to do the construction of the dam somehow. So I don't even understand all that. But do you know of any other groups right now? We have all these watershed groups. Some of them seem to be supporting this idea, right? So that's yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the problem. And I look at this as fish eugenics. When you literally say, I'm willing to support sacrificing this whole stream to get the wrong type of fish out of there. Again, still Colorado native. We get it. If it was a cichlid or something like that, we might have a cichlid, whatever you say, we might have a different conversation. But you're supporting it because you say it's better for the environment. But is the environment the entity, or is the individual fish the entity that you're killing?
Right.
You're literally participating in fish eugenics at that point, like in a cleansing of the water, because you believe the water should be reimagined as it was before humans showed up. we're the problem in this situation. We caused this problem, and now we're going to cause a secondary problem by killing everything that ended up there, as well as possibly hurting ourselves downstream. So,
Yeah.
humans aren't always the problem. Don't get me wrong, but like in this situation, it's clear cut.
Sure.
We caused this because we didn't even know there was a genetic difference, prior to genetic science. This could have been done in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where it's just like, hey, stock that thing with trout. We've caused this though. And
Right.
so, do we solve it by killing everything, including the tadpoles, if it's in the wrong season, adult frogs, plankton, what have you? Is that the right thing to do?
Right. Well, a similar issue is with the wild horses on public lands. So most folks are saying, well, okay, they're out there. You can actually make an argument that horses are native because if you go back to Paleolithic time, there do appear to have been horses ranging around on in North America. That's not well known, but that's a fact. And but sure, the wild horses have some impact on the ecosystem, but it's a red herring because we are letting cows and sheep run rampant on public lands for public lands ranching. So, how about we get the cows and sheep off first, and then we can talk about the wild horse thing? And I think there's some people that's what this issue is. I would say with the fuel reduction logging, I would say it's almost always bad faith or misinformation for the most part. But when it comes to issues like this, I think people can have a valid ecological concern about, okay, well, what is the native species here? But the question is, yes, does the cure end up being worse than the so-called disease? And I think anything that has to do with, like you said, basically killing off a whole ecosystem in order to do this kind of arbitrary switching out of species, I think that's a problem. And I think there's other things that we could be doing as priorities if we're really concerned about our watershed. Even if this was an issue, it would be so far down the list. It's weird that they're prioritizing this. I mean, there's all this ecological destruction in our watersheds and direct harm to watersheds and over withdrawal of water, etc. We could be reintroducing beavers, which are native species, into a lot of these watersheds. There's all these things we could be doing instead. Instead, they're like, we want to kill some stuff. And I guess a question is, and you went over this somewhat, but maybe we can go into a little more detail if you know. Are there other ways to accomplish this goal without just killing off the whole stream?
Well, interesting. This is a little tough because the lake is in a wilderness area without a trail. So originally, when we thought it was a more accessible waterway, um, there was some folks and I that were discussing, hey, could you have a fish off, so to speak, a little boon to the local economy. And that's the more conservative libertarian side of me. It says, can you find a free market solution? If this was something that was accessible by a dirt road, maybe have some people go up there and say, look, fish to your heart's content. There's no limits here because we're going to have to get rid of these things anyway. They did this in Antero. Antero Reservoir, they lifted all the fishing restrictions before they completely drained it. I don't know if they got all the fish out or not, but at least there was a thought to that. Say, go ahead and dare I say, eat them, consume them, fish them. But these are tiny fish, and it's also in an area that I don't think we want to have 100 people in one day going to because there's other damage that could happen. But we had thought about that. Is there someone that you could hire or even have in a volunteer group to start moving these fish to their native habitat? I mean, I think that'd be a fascinating project to look into. That one half of that $300,000, whatever was going to go into that, and instead of killing the whole river, saying, yeah, we need to spend about 30, 40 grand or whatever it is for the appropriate buckets and some trucks on the service road, but we have volunteers who want to walk up and down with these buckets, and we'll put them in Yampa Valley where they belong, in quotes, but that's where they belong, right? That's their normal range. That will be a much kinder, gentler thing to do to these living beings. Say, hey, we're going to put you where you belong. We're going to do as good of a job as we can to get you all out of there. And because it's accessible that way, and if you have careful, conscientious volunteers, that there is a way to get up and down without destroying everything. Could you do it like with a large kind of a net that two people can bring across? Apparently, yes. And then if you get the fish out and dare I say you dispatch them by normal means, would the wildlife consume them and have a benefit? Well, yeah, possibly. So, some of these ideas might be really horrible because I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, right? Just kind of thinking of things on a podcast. But at least you get the conversation going with some smarter people than me and say, okay, so what could be done besides just pouring chemicals into a literally pristine lake? Josh, I've never been to a lake in Colorado where I've seen nobody on the way up or down, and not one piece of garbage, not one Cliff Bar wrapper, not one bottle cap, nothing, absolutely nothing. And this is where we're going to just go off and kill everything.
Yeah. No, I think that's would be a tragedy. And this is clearly an area that should be off limits and it may be actually illegal. So it might be worth trying to figure out if there can be some sort of court challenge. Not that court challenges are everything. Our courts are not always great anyway, but more information out there to the public. And I think a lot of people would be upset with this, maybe even some anglers. But yeah, I wonder if you have anything else to say on this particular topic, and then we'll get into the last question.
Um, I think this kind of strikes at the heart of what it means to care about animals. Do you care about the system, well, of the animals and the individual animals may live or die to protect the system, or do you look at that individual as a critical part to this world? Um, you know, my girlfriend and I both work in the airline world, and on the way to Denver International Airport this morning, dropping her off, we saw a prairie dog flipped over on its back, and I didn't know what it was until I drove past, and it was trying to scramble to get itself upright, and I'm like, my gosh, this is no good. And Lindsay follows a vegan lifestyle, and she has a lot of empathy, for every living being. So she asked if I could go back around to take a look, and see if I could shoo this guy off the road. We had an umbrella or something else in the car that I could maybe get this guy off the road. Maybe he just was having trouble flipping over. By the time I came back, the poor guy was dead. Does that prairie dog matter? To me, yes. And I felt bad. But that prairie dog might not matter in the situation of when I talk to someone in the government wildlife side of things that says, yes, we vaccinate prairie dogs. And they do it with a peanut butter treat. And some prairie dogs are hungrier than others and they eat too much and they die. But we're trying to save the colony. I'm like, so you can't appropriately dose the prairie dogs. So some die, but you're more concerned about saving the colony, but you're not concerned about the individuals that have that heartier appetite and they succumb to too much vaccine. And that's an interesting debate. Do you save the colony or do you save the individual in that situation? And so I ask people who would say, well, we have to save nature to say, but why? Is it the individual animal that you care about, that one deer that you're walking on a trail and you make a connection with or something like this, or that one eagle that's inspired you to get involved in saving animals? Or is it the system that you're more concerned about and the individuals are more automatons in your eyes? And if they live or die, that's okay, but the system is what matters. And I think that's an interesting philosophic debate, and I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in between.
I mean, in my mind, it would have to be both because an ecosystem is made up of individuals, right? So obviously, an ecosystem itself is important. If there's just lone individuals, there's no system to keep them alive. But the idea of just sacrificing individuals in the name of the ecosystem, whether that's even accurate or not. So like what they're claiming to do with the fish is they're saying, well, we're going to kill off these fish for the greater health of the watershed. It's like, well, first of all, debatable. Number two, in this case, you may be actually doing more harm. And yeah, but I think those arguments and those debates and discussions are important to have. What is a worthwhile action? I think a lot of the times our government is not guided by what is really best for ecosystem. Like, I'm sorry, I don't trust the government on what's best for ecosystems. I think their credibility has been eroded to the point of illegitimacy. It doesn't mean they get everything wrong all the time. It doesn't mean they don't have good folks involved with it. It's just they should be questioned. And it is unfortunate when things like this rotenone in the water or other issues like fuel reduction are just kind of glossed over. Oh, we already know that this is the thing to do, and there should be no debate. And media outlets will just intentionally censor any discussion and debate, that is a recipe for lack of credibility. But yeah, what one pre-question before the end is, so you had mentioned you have some libertarian conservative leanings. So a lot of folks who are environmentalists would say, oh, well, that automatically makes you anti-environment. So give me an argument for how libertarian conservative perspectives can actually overlap with environmental protection. A lot of people would consider to be progressive, liberal, Democrat, leftist, etc.
Sure. Um, First of all, the root word of conservatives is conserve. That's something that I've thought about for many, many years. Why should I not care about certain, inalienable rights, things in the Constitution? And why should that cause me to want to pave over everything? If I believe I have rights, and this is something that I heard a long time ago on a Rush Limbaugh show, that animals don't have rights because rights are something you're supposed to be able to attest for. Since animals can't speak, basically, he said, therefore they don't have rights. And I said, well, hold on a second. The actual thing is if you believe in God, rights come from God and they're recognized by a government. So if we have rights, did God stop with us? Or did he ascribe those same types of rights to other entities? We took a cruise from San Francisco to Hawaii. First of all, by the way, had to buy the appropriate soaps to even be on a cruise ship, because I'm so worried about what soap gets out into the water and stuff. I had no idea. I had no idea like how bad cruise ships can be. But seeing flying fish out there and thinking that's just the tip of this iceberg. There's 15,000 foot of water possibly below us. And those animals don't care that we exist. They have no idea that we exist. It doesn't matter at all. So if rights stop with us, then whatever creation you believe in literally forgot about the octopus that lives at 10,000 feet, that's like kind of like albino white that has to, doesn't have eyes, that kind of thing. Like the Dumbo octopus that's way down, these angler fish, none of them matter to creation. No, they all have a place to me. So if I have rights, do they have rights? And how do we make this whole thing work? And, as far as the libertarian economist Milton Friedman, he literally talked about environmental laws because he said, environmental laws are just as long as they're there to protect the third party. And the third party could be the downstream user or downwind user, right? The air, the water, things like that. If you're going to do something on your land that affects me, this is a 1970s conversation. Now it's gotten a little more nuanced and, as we understand more about science. But if you're going to do something on your land that affects me, I have a right to be protected from it. And so he saw environmental laws as just and right and moral from a libertarian side because you're infringing on my liberty. Now, ascribe that to the rights of animals. You could be infringing on their liberty as well by just cutting down their homes, wholesale by saying, this few thousand acres gone because we need to protect an Excel power line or something like that, or like, you're the wrong type of fish, so you lose your rights because you just happen to be in the wrong place. We would never in modern society get away with doing this to humans. And thank God that we couldn't do this. But when it comes to fish, it's like, out of here. You're the wrong type of fish. You're in the wrong place. You should be over there, but you're over here. Therefore, we get to kill you all. That's barbarism when it comes to humans. So there's a lot of it there. And when it comes to, being more a conservative in the sense of, do I have my rights protected again? I would say that literally has nothing to do with how much I want to see or don't want to see for progress. Like, when it comes to a mine that might hurt somebody right downstream, it's like, well, the mine might be great because I want this particular product. Like, hey, this is cobalt or other rare earth elements. But what happens to those people? Do they not matter at all? Is there a better free market solution to this situation? Are there ways to keep it clean as well? Free market doesn't always seem to work on its own. I do believe some oversight has to happen. Transparency has to happen as well. And that's why we, like you and I, we do a lot of core requests. But I'd be fascinated to see if corporations, as an extension of the government, and could be considered state actors and also have some open records acts applied to them as well. If it's publicly traded and publicly held, should it be publicly available to see what's actually happening under the hood, so to speak? And that can help a lot with the free market, but we don't live in a free market really at all, Josh. I mean, like as a music teacher a while back, I lived in a free market. If I had a bad lesson, you might fire me and say never again. Farmers markets, pretty close to free markets. A lot of what we do is manage markets. There's so many different pieces at play, so many different lobbyists and things like that. So I don't know where to find an actual free market in many places in America. So it's tough to have that argument to say free market doesn't work, because in a lot of places you don't even find one, and you find a lot of government corruption, like you were talking about, people looking the other way, and good people having to hold their job and not say a whole lot. So there's a lot of that going on as well. But there's nothing wrong with being a conservative as far as your values go, and then also valuing Earth. Why do they have to not go in the same direction?
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think for those of us who care about the natural world, maybe people have different political views on a lot of different issues, and some values don't overlap, but finding the ones that do, if we're really serious about the eco crisis, whatever you want to call it. And, I know for a fact that you are a staunch environmentalist who is doing some difficult work that other people aren't doing. So yeah, I encourage people to get outside of their boxes, accept that you're going to disagree with people on something. 100% of people I have met in my life, I disagree with them on something. And
Yes.
as long as they're not advocating for physical harm to innocent people, you know what? We're going to have to put our differences aside for now to work on the things we care about. And sure, we can have the discussions, we can have the debates, we can even have the fights, but I think the overlap is crucial. So yeah, again, I encourage people to reach over the aisle, accept that right now, sure, Republicans are pretty bad on the environment, but guess what? So are Democrats. So let's get over our little silos. Let's work on things that actually matter. And let me ask the last question. So the Green Root podcast is about getting to the roots of the ecological crisis. So what would you say would be a root cause of either the eco crisis, however you want to frame that, or an aspect of it that we might have discussed? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to go this direction. We don't value the Renaissance person much anymore. I've been on many hearings where even if I have good information, have read documentation, thousands of pages, the answer will be, well, you're not a geologist, Mike. So therefore, everything you just said doesn't matter. You're not a civil engineer, or you're not this, or you're not that. And it's like, well, I'm me. And do I have the ability? Oliver and Wilbur Wright did not have degrees in aviation or aerospace when they had the first powered flight. People can do things of their own volition. So, Josh, what I wanted to say is, with this degradation of the Renaissance person, people are, I feel like, often reliant on the expert, and the experts can get into positions of power and use the power. And therefore you get into the whole one ring idea. Can anyone truly wield power over another human? One ring to rule them all. J.R.R. Tolkien was a smart man. He didn't just write a fantasy novel. He was writing a corollary for how people use power. Truly. And anytime you look at this kind of stuff, you just think, well, what would Lord of the Rings have done, so to speak? And it's kind of funny, because if I get into an expert position, say in aviation, and you say, I'm afraid of turbulence, and I say, Josh, you're crazy. Turbulence is just fine. It's part of it all, which generally it is. And then you get in a situation where you're in a severe to extreme turbulence situation, and you're like, well, I didn't have my seatbelt on because Mike said it was just fine. I bounced off the ceiling. This thing has experienced structural failure. I'm scared. Like we barely landed. And I'm like, so what was my expert opinion worth at that point? You still have the ability to study something on your own and come up to your own conclusion on something. And I feel like what's happening is we're becoming overly reliant on the experts. And like you said, that one article you read like a press release, and it's like, oh, well, if the expert says it's good, it must be good. And I don't have the time or the inclination to study this. So moving on. I have trouble reading documents, for health studies. Doesn't mean I don't try. I looked at the Parkinson's situation here and I said, my gosh, well, okay, they were injected by rats. They injected rats, by rats, injected rats. But does that mean ingesting it is a problem or not a problem? Well, let's try to interpret this study as best we can. Let's try to get some other expert opinions. Let's maybe talk to some doctors, some nutritionists, things like that, and see if they've run across this kind of stuff. Does it get across the blood-brain barrier that easily via ingestion? Fine. But I'm not just going to say, well, this study said it was ingestion and this study said it was injection, so I'm done. The experts say it's fine, and I'm going to move on, and those fish will die, and it'll be okay. I'll go about my week, my month, my year. I'll go hiking somewhere else because those fish are dead, and my gosh, it stinks up there. So I don't want to hike up there because, it's poor dead fish. But, oh, well, the experts said it was good. So I truly worry about that. And there was a specific guy named Rahm Emanuel that had that never let a crisis go to waste statement back in the day. And I worry about that as well. Crises are great money makers, right? They say if it bleeds, it leads, that kind of thing. So everything has turned into a crisis. Everything has turned into a war. George Carlin would talk about this, the war on drugs, the war on this, the war on that. And he was making jokes in the 80s about that. Can we pause and say, like you said earlier, is this a problem in the first place? Can we debate it? Can we figure out a good idea, for this stream, that stream, this forest, that forest? Or is it just there is a war on fire, so we must kill the trees to save the trees?
Right. Yeah.
And then because there is a crisis, there is an emergency, there is a war on something, we are therefore then not allowed to question it, because the people that are in the path of the fire would say, well, I just want to feel safe. And the one conservative principle, unfortunately, is freedom and safety don't always go hand in hand. Freedom can be dangerous, but do you want the freedom itself? Do you want that ideal to say, I have to take the time and study? I'd rather be outside right now. I'd rather be doing fun things or working on the deck, but we're here talking about really important stuff, and we're trying to learn as much as we can. And that's what I completely respect about you, Josh. You could be doing a million other things, but you're fighting this fight to say, let's bring truth and let's bring study and let's bring debate to these issues. So thank you.
Well, yeah, well, thank you. Really glad to have you as an ally working on these issues, and really glad you could come on the Green Root podcast.
Anytime. And I'm looking forward to working with you for a long time.
Excellent. Well, thank you.